Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Outside Looking In, the podcast series wherein I, Samson Folk, talk to 29 other people about what's going on with their team and what they think of the Raptors so that everyone can kind of get a consensus on what the world, mostly the United States people think of, Canada's team. And also so that, you can slowly, through listening to all these, learn about the league at large. This one is a big one. Not only right before we record this have the Raptors reportedly been heating up in talks with this team. We'll discuss, the reality of, what might happen with all that kind of stuff. But the team that has been entrenched in the most trade rumors for some time, maybe the most, in some ways, like just forthright. Uh, yeah, objectively the most forthright trade request we've gotten in recent years, just because of the contract stuff. It's the Portland Trailblazers. Is Eric, my dear friend, and you can find his stuff at Blazers Uprise for what it's worth if you want to keep following this saga after and follow like a really fun Portland team. But Eric, we're here. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going pretty good. How's your summer been?
It's been awesome. Just hanging out.
You take a vacation?
Yeah, I was in New Zealand for like 40 days. It was great. I kind of tried to turn my brain off of basketball for a decent amount of time. And then by the end of it, Canada was doing much better than expected in
Yeah.
the World Cup. So covered that maybe a bit more and cut the vacation short. But writing about basketball while in New Zealand is not such a bad thing, I find. How was
Sounds
your
fun.
summer?
Oh, pretty good. Other than this Dame stuff hanging over the whole entire thing, not knowing at any second if I'm going to have to go do an emergency stream
Yeah.
about a Dame trade for almost 3 months now since the draft. Yeah, it's been pretty crazy as a Blazer fan. Just this whole saga.
You've been sitting on pins and needles, dude. They
Right.
don't give you they don't give you a day off. They just make you
No.
sit and wait in suspense. That's what we won't make, we won't have any suspense for this podcast. For anybody who is not interested in this kind of stuff, I timestamp every episode. Go click around as you like if you're not interested in the trade talk, more of the on-court stuff, but we're doing trade talk stuff first.
Yeah.
Dame, the Raptors, as ever, they show up in every single because they have interesting guys.
Right.
They showed up in the Kevin Durant stuff. It's like, well, they have Scottie Barnes, they have OG, they have Pascal, they have a litany of other interesting players. They've shown up. Reportedly, the betting odds, they're represented pretty well there. If anybody cares about that kind of stuff for indicators, they're typically pretty bad. Um, there's been lots of reports, both out of Portland and out of people in Toronto, just kind of being like, hey, maybe they had something. Somebody said no, they won't include X, they won't include Y. Eric, let's just, I can ramble as long as I'd like, but you know a lot more than me. What's the situation with Dame over there?
Well, the situation is Dame appears to not be interested in going anywhere but the Miami Heat. And so it kind of puts a wrinkle into any other team that trades for him. Now we know Masai Ujiri has been known to take a risk on a player like that, which is why Toronto you can never rule them out, right? Because Masai could just say, I don't care, right? And I'm gonna dare Dame to say no, I'm not gonna play for Toronto. So that's why they keep coming up because I mean it's a wild card, and like you said, they have pieces. They do owe a pick to San Antonio for Jakob Pertl last year, but they can maybe do some things to free up a few extra picks if they need to, and they still have a couple in the future that they could use. And then we know the Blazers have been trying to get players like Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby for years now to pair with Damian Lillard. So it'd be kind of weird if we ended up trading Dame for one of those players, but you do have pieces that the Blazers have coveted for a long time.
So the whispers on this side of the border, I suppose, or this side of the coast, it works both ways. Um, that they are reluctant to include Scottie Barnes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's as much as like you hear stuff, but I
Yeah,
haven't heard it from the horse's mouth being like, this is what was offered, this is what was ever. And then so there's like 18 reports out there that say they talked and somebody said no.
yeah.
So I can't shed any light. But you, as the more interested party in Portland's prosperity going forward, if it's the Raptors, what are you trying to get? What makes you happy?
Well, I don't like Scottie Barnes' fit with Scoot
Sure.
because I think Scottie needs the ball in his hands to be most effective, and Scoot is also seemingly going to be that way. So I don't know if that's the best fit. However, I think Scottie Barnes would be by far the best player the Blazers could maybe get for Dame if you're just talking about pure player and not picks. So whether you keep Barnes or flip him for more assets down the road, I think, yeah, that's definitely who I would target if I'm the Blazers. But it doesn't sound like Ujiri isn't interested at all in moving him, just like last summer. So, yeah, it's going to be tough to get him included in the trade. But yeah, that's definitely who I'd ask for.
I think that Scotty, the tough part, I think they could be persuaded if the contract stuff wasn't so murky. Because if it's
Hmm.
Scotty, you get that rookie scale contract. And then the machinations, you have to start talking to other teams. You got to start working other stuff out. Like, hey guys, we need to come up with $38 million, and
Yeah.
Scotty is, less than 10. It's kind of tough to find your way there. The next answer, then, and I assume the one they've been kicking around. Well, actually, I would assume and have heard that like they said, Portland, do you want Gary Trent Jr.? Like,
Right. Back.
because every GM is like a little, bastard trying to get like the best deal possible. And every
Yeah.
GM is like, what are you doing to me right now, man?
Of
But
course.
OG is good enough and of consequence enough to be talked about as maybe the centerpiece of something
Mhm.
like this. You still have to add a whole bunch of other things. Is there any interest on your side? I know how Raptors fans feel about trading
Yeah.
OG, especially the fact that if Dame comes, you want OG and Dame probably
Right.
playing together. But
Exactly.
how are things on your side?
I love OG as a player, but in my mind, if you're trading Dame, it's kind of weird to get win now players and possibly be stuck in that area where you're good enough to maybe play for the play-in or one of the final seeds in the playoffs, which both of our teams have been stuck in that kind of range the last 2 years, right? So, like, do you want to continue being in that, or is it better to just take your lumps for a couple years with Sharp and Scoot and see how they develop, and just try to get as best picks as you can in the next couple drafts? And so, I'm kind of of the opinion that you shouldn't trade for someone like OG. Once again, it's probably lessening the value because that's probably the best asset that the Raptors would realistically give up. But in my mind, I'm just trying to accumulate as many pieces that help with the rebuild. And then you add on top of that the OG contract situation. You just mentioned the Barnes being on rookie deal, but OG can opt
Hmm.
out of his contract next summer. So the Blazers, as a rebuilding team, are going to either have to overpay to keep him, like every free agent they have to do, or lose him for nothing. So you had 1 year of OG and he's gone, or you can maybe flip him at the trade deadline, but he's going to be a rental, so he wouldn't be that valuable. So it's just kind of a weird dynamic, but to me, I wouldn't be looking at players like OG in Portland situation.
Okay, so quickly, thoughts on, let's say somehow they figure out a Scotty deal. We're talking
Mhm.
about for the Raptors, the immediate future, right? Like it's a team trying to compete for a title. Where do you think that puts the Raptors? Like there's a assume a couple guys of the depth pieces, maybe a couple bench pieces, Gradey, for example.
Mhm.
Maybe Thaddeus Young, I assume, would go out because he's like 8 million of like dead weight.
Yeah.
Maybe some draft capital, but a nucleus of Pascal, Dame, OG, and Pirtle, I suppose, would be there as well for sure. How do you feel about that in the East?
Uh, I still don't know if it's a championship contender. I think they're dang good. But I don't think they're as good as if, for example, Miami gets Dame with
Yeah.
Jimmy and Bam. I don't think they're as good if Philly gets him and it's Embiid and Dame. I think that's slightly better. But in those situations, those teams, I mean, Harden's, who knows what's going to happen with that situation. Miami doesn't get Dame. They're kind of in trouble. with losing Gabe Vincent and Max Strus this summer and not really replacing those guys. So um, it doesn't seem like they'd be contenders, but like I feel like that would still be one of the best teams Dame's been on, and we've seen what he's done with a much lesser squad. So I could definitely see them making a run and surprising people. And I just don't know if the top end is high enough to take down some of the powers in the East.
Yeah, you said they're dang good. You've seen a lot of dang good as a Blazers fan.
Right.
The past, since Dame was drafted, it's almost as if dang good is, a synonym for Dame good. But
Mm,
before we move on, just your thoughts on where this goes. I know you're like, you think it's Miami. It's going to
yeah.
be Miami. But yeah, just, I guess, let me feed the words into your mouth. A leading question, of course.
Well, yeah, I think ultimately Dame goes to Miami. The problem is I don't think the Blazers front office is necessarily too happy about him getting his wish. So that's why you hear all these rumblings lately about other teams coming into it. But yeah, at this point, nothing would surprise me. I heard so many things that um, make sense logically, but then like logic doesn't seem to apply to a lot of these situations when emotion gets involved, and just the whole situation with Dame and his loyalty, and whether or not the front office had loyalty back and took advantage of that loyalty and all that kind of stuff. It's just so messy, and I like, so I wouldn't be surprised with any scenario at this point. What
and
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say both sides are competing for the public favor, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and so the messaging, nobody gets to be direct, really.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that adds another, I guess, layer of complexity.
As a Raptors fan, do you want the Blazer or Dave to go to the Raptors, or
I'd love to cover Dame. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. And also because I think I think it would be a really fun team to watch, a really
mhm,
fun team to cover. And it's tough to build it as good as that team would be. They'd be super expensive, but it's
yeah,
tough to build a team that good. Um, yeah, and the Raptors, like, there have been some difficulties building properly the last couple of years anyway. That like maybe you skip a few steps and
yeah,
it's too big a leap to get upstairs, maybe or something like that. But it's really interesting. If they did the deal, I'm jazzed, man. Cool.
yeah,
Covered. I guess if Dame reports, right? If Dame's like,
right, yeah,
he's like, yeah, four
uh,
years, I'll sit on it. I mean, I don't know, but
yeah.
it's interesting.
People didn't think Kawhi was going to report though, and he was fine.
But man, like Dame, if he didn't report, that's that's a big bluff to call, but
Right,
it's a big thing to not bluff on. Is like
right.
I'll just sit. This is a guy who he's crafting a Hall of Fame resume. He wants to be like whether or not it's of the utmost importance to him, but why wouldn't a guy want to finish his career and then stay top 5 and three-pointers made for like a long time? Why wouldn't a
Mhm,
guy want to, take the last couple of years, maybe 3-4 years of his prime and keep scoring like north of 27 points per game? It's important stuff. Like
mhm,
he is a guy who has been thoughtful about his career, but also it's business first. And that's also the thing too is like this flies in the face of good business because you know, that's money, a lot of money.
yeah,
Like
yes.
one of Dame's game checks, if it just fell off the back of the truck into your pocket or mine, it'd be like, hey,
Oh.
this is pretty good.
I'm
So
set up for life.
yeah, exactly. So that's
I
kind of
I think Dame reports though. I like if they
yeah.
did get traded to the Raptors, I think there might be some hemming and hawing, like at first, but I think he
They
would
they
show
put the
up.
call to Chris Haynes. They're like, we need more media messaging.
Yeah.
Like we need a favor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he would report. But I think there's a lot of stuff out of Miami too that's like, hey, we don't even want him. Who's this Dame guy? Which is like pretty funny, especially if he can be had for a bargain. Like turning
Yeah.
your nose up at it, I'm like, come on, man, just make the trade. But I
Right.
guess we'll see. We're two teams, not just Dame.
Mhm.
The Raptors. You, like last year when we did the outside looking in episode, not only is there a couple guys on the team who you're like, hell yeah, I like those guys, but you're like, I like the way they're building. I think the team's going to be good. That was not unique to you. Everybody who came in here and talked to me was like,
Yeah,
yeah, they'll be a good team. And they ended up in the play in, which wasn't that far back from what a lot of people thought was like, yeah, they finished decently the year before, but they could get better and still finish worse in the standings was like a realistic thing that the East had gotten better. It didn't really happen that way. They
yeah.
struggled. From your perspective, how do you feel about them holding firm, at least currently, on playing big, even losing more shooting in some sense, and I guess the overall direction of the team at this point?
Yeah, it's just so weird thinking about a team without Fred there,
Yeah,
and so you would think if they weren't going the rebuild route, they would do everything they can to keep him.
they
So
tried for
yeah,
what
I
it's
know,
worth.
I know. Houston, I mean, I don't know how Fred could have passed that offer up, but
It's so much.
I don't know what Houston's doing, by the way. Like, who knows? But they tried to steal Brooke Lopez from Milwaukee too for some
I
reason. It's like,
liked that,
yeah,
because like
but it's
Brooke is so good.
yeah, but like what? They're not.
Dylan Brooks will keep shooting 70% from 3 on about 8 attempts per game.
All right,
Yeah, it's the
yeah,
FIBA World Cup.
it'll all
Yeah,
work
sure.
out.
Yeah.
But then it takes away time from their young players, like I was saying with the Blazers. So, but yeah, it was like so interesting to me to see what Ujiri was going to do this summer with does he rebuild? Does he finally trade OG or Siakam? And then you hear these rumors that Siakam wouldn't accept uh, an extension with any team other than the Raptors. So that kind of plays into it to where maybe his value in trades wasn't good enough because of that. So you pretty much have to keep him. And do you want to trade a guy who wants to stay? That's that good. So it's just a weird dynamic, but I feel like they're kind of gonna get stuck in that window that we were talking about where you're not good enough to win, but you're not bad enough to bottom out and get a top pick. And now they owe their pick, I think it's top six protected, right?
Mhm.
To San Antonio. So they'd have to be really bad to keep their pick next year. So I don't know how you add you could maybe do something with Trent later in the year and Thad Young's contract. Maybe you have some contracts that you can move, but if unless you move OG or Pascal, I don't know how you get like a drastically different team there. So um, yes, it's just a weird dynamic of are they just doing that thing where a lot of teams get stuck in where they're not really good enough to win it all, but they're not bad enough to get better long term.
That's the interesting part is that I really like the Grady pick for what it's worth. I think that's like progress moving forward. I think a lot of, and this is the tough part, really, really good teams, really good team building can kind of, through their transactions, buffer themselves against depending too much on development.
Hmm.
And the Raptors right now, based on, pretty expensive team, they're hard capped. The fact that uh if they did better than the 7th seed, if they were 6 or higher, I'd be pretty surprised and like super impressed. Would obviously be overjoyed to watch that team figure it out. But this is a team that is relying on development from Scottie Barnes pretty heavily. That
Yeah,
that growth into an initiator to take over a lot of the possessions that Fred VanVleet had to make them like, oh, we figured out, how to play a lot of basketball with like less shooting on the floor, and we are doing a little bit more rangy things defensively, and we're just going to be huge defensively, be a really good defense, and run out a bunch. Like this is how they're kind of stylizing their basketball, but it won't be super. It's also similar to what we've seen in the past, which kind of slowed down last season, and it won't be super compelling unless Scottie makes that leap because OG
mm,
probably isn't. Pascal, whether some people think he's going to keep improving, I think it would be cool. I think he will. I don't think we've seen Pascal's best season yet. I think marginal improvements. He's a gym rat. He came to the game late. He always seems to be adding stuff like, yes, he'll keep getting better, but that jump to like MVP, top 10 is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And he's already all NBA level. Like, how much more impact are you getting out of that? It's tough to say a whole bunch. Jakob a full season, I think, will be great, especially on defense.
Mhm.
Pick and roll stuff is good, but they have very little like proven pick and roll stuff now. Maybe it becomes really good. Maybe Pascal or Scottie are like just tremendous this season doing it, but the Raptors' best stretch offensively last season came with a lot of Fred and Jakob pick and roll. So basically, everything's up in the air. And I know everybody who's listened to like 11 of these episodes so far is going to be upset at me saying this, but Gary, OG, and Pascal are all expiring.
Yeah.
That's like tough to navigate.
Mhm.
Um, so I think a lot of it is tied to development. And that's a tough place to be as a team builder, but it also does leave potential for like maybe Scottie's the hero this city deserves or something
Yeah.
like that. Um,
Well, the other X factor there is no Nick Nurse, right? There's a new coach in
that's
town.
correct.
So it's not just like, I guess, necessarily the same thing because there's a new voice in the locker room, and so maybe that unlocks something or changes something there. But it could also have the opposite too, where like maybe Nick Nurse was holding it all together, and it's not going to look quite as good with another coach there. So it's kind of scary not knowing which route that's going to be.
I think
And
I
then Nick
think
Nurse goes to Philly, so
yeah. I think Darko will be a positive. Now, a
yeah.
positive in the interpersonal aspect, certainly. Nick had a lot of trouble navigating the more grading aspects of how he operates towards the end there, both with fellow coaches and with players. And like, he's obviously a very good coach at the NBA level.
Mhm.
I'm sure Philly fans will be happy to have him. And it's like Larry Bird said, what did he say, like 3 years for a head coach or something? And he's
Yeah.
like, then you move on. I Nick did 5, right? Like he found his way to a lot of wins. He moves on. You know, everybody's happy. Good enough. But Darko, I think interpersonal stuff will be better. I expect the Raptors to. I think they've invested a little bit more into development, especially on the coaching staff and their scouting department. Big shout out Ben Uzo, who just got, well, I guess that's not development scout, a pro scout, but he just got hired on, I think, 2 days ago. I think that's important because post championship they had brain drain. They lost like quite a few people. The big hero Jama Malalela, he came back. He's a lead assistant now with the team. They lost him post championship too. We'll see how it all goes. There's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff up in the air.
Yeah.
Another team banking on development, although lower stakes. The Dame stuff is all high stakes,
Yeah.
but lower stakes is the Shaedon Sharpe, the Scoot Henderson, like those two in particular, obviously. But who knows what comes back in the trade for Dame? There's guys like Chris Murray, who I know some people are really high on. There's people who are still holding on to that, like Keon Johnson. They're like he might pop. Who knows really? But what are your expectations for this Blazers team in a season that is hopefully not going to be marred by Dame discourse?
Yeah, my expectations are simply the development part of it, like you mentioned. I just want to see because when Dame came in rookie year, he had a lot of veterans like Wes Matthews and Nicholas Batum, Lamarcus Aldridge. So he steps right into that point guard role, and you could tell from the jump, like this was the guy, right? He
He
was
was
going
awesome, man.
he was going to be good. So that's what first and foremost I'm looking at Scoot. 2 years of experience now at the G League. I just want well, I wanted them to build around Dame, but now that that's not happening, I want them to just turn the keys fully over to Scoot and let him just have that same runway where it's your team now. You're the man from day one, and I want to see him just step in. And I'm not saying he can't have growing pains. There of course be those growing
Hmm.
pains, but hopefully he's in the running for rookie of the year. It's going to be tough to outdo the hype for Wemby, but um, like I just want to see him step in and be like, okay, we have our point guard for the next decade. We're set there, and then same thing with Sharp. Like, does he play like he did towards the end of last season? And in which case, like we might have the beginnings of a really good team. and we might have the same problem where we have two guards and we still need to find a front court. But is that I'm just looking at this season as, do we have the answer long term? Do we possibly have the two stars to lead us into this next iteration of Blazers basketball on the roster already? And if so, I don't really think the Dame trade matters that much, because most rebuilds, you're trying to get pieces to acquire, like the process in Philly. You're trying to get the number one pick every year and you're trying to add talent that way. But if you're starting a rebuild with two stars on your roster already that are under rookie contracts, I don't think there's a better way to do it. And I think what happens in the Dame trade doesn't matter. If Scoot and Sharpe become stars, you're fine. If they don't, I don't think the rebuild's going to go anywhere. So I would put everything on their development, and also identifying which type of players would fit best with them. And it could be 2 years out from now in a draft in 2025 or something, but you need to identify players now that you want to target over the next couple years to pair with them. And so it's all about finding out what their style is, what works best for them, and getting the right roster around them, unlike what they did with Dame for a decade.
I bet Cooper Flag fits pretty well with
Oh,
those
dude. No.
guys.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the draft lotto now, the percentages, it's tough to
Yeah.
get the number one pick, but um yeah, I would be setting themselves up to do everything they could to get him, because that would be the perfect fit with those guys, in my opinion.
Yeah. The run you mentioned for Shaedon towards the end of the season, it's longer, but if you want the sexiest numbers, the last 10 games, yeah, the Blazers were 2-8 in the last 10. But having a guy like Shaedon come out, 57% true shooting, 24 points, 7 boards, 4 assists. The most interesting aspect is that like the 20% assist rate.
Yeah.
It's anytime a combo who is a very like lithe and really unique and organic scorer makes that playmaking jump. It was a really big deal when Devin Booker did it. It was a
Yeah.
really big deal when Bradley Beal did it. And those guys did it in years like 4 and 5 around
Mhm.
there. For Shaden to already be making like pretty good steps as reading the floor, he's tall, he's hyper athletic, he's got like that butter sweet stroke. Just he's a very, very interesting player, and not like interesting like, if he hits or not. It's like interesting that you're wondering if it's, all-star someday or all NBA. And that's kind of that's a really fun place to be in paying attention to players.
You know what's weird about that, Samson? He showed none of that, like, through the first 60 plus games of the year, right? Like, I had conversations with people like, "Does this guy even know how to pass the ball?" Like he had, like, very little assists or, like, even flashes of playmaking. Like, usually you see that in a player, and it's like, okay, like, he's not the best passer, but he shows signs of, like, reading a defense well, and maybe he'll do that. Like, he showed none of that all season, right? Like we're starting to question, like, is this just going to be like a shooter slasher type player, and you're not going to be able to play him much on ball at all. And then all of a sudden they pull the shoot on the season and they put him in the lead role, and it's like night and day difference. All of a sudden he's throwing these passes and like running, like he looks like a pick and roll wizard, and you're like, is this guy a rookie, or like you mentioned, is he a 4 or 5 year vet? And like I just couldn't believe the difference when they put that responsibility on him. And that's another reason why I feel like when you're rebuilding or when you're trying to develop guys, I would give them more responsibility until they prove they can't handle it, because he was also saying, I want to guard the best guy on the other team every
Yeah.
night, So like that's also awesome. And he was doing a pretty good job, all things considered. I mean, he's got to learn the craftiness of how players draw fouls
Yeah.
and take advantage of younger players. But like just that attitude last year was so refreshing, after kind of wondering if maybe he was kind of slacking off on defense a little bit. Chauncey had mentioned several times during the season that was a reason he wasn't playing more, was blown assignments and stuff like that. So to see him just all of a sudden pop at the end of the season was phenomenal. and it definitely made the Blazers realize that they had, not only a fan favorite with the dunks and all that, but someone that they could legitimately build around. And then you add a Scoot Henderson to that, and I mean, the sky's the limit for those two if they keep working hard, and I believe they will.
There's very few ways to massage the pain of like a Hall of Famer leaving, a top 75 player leaving.
Hmm.
Having guys like Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe just
Yeah.
electrify the offense to and obviously Anfernee Simons is like firmly entrenched in making offense go. Having that kind of stuff is a very good salve for that. Um,
Well, you mentioned Anthony Simons. That I cannot understand why teams were not targeting him if he was available this summer. And like we heard that there was no real good offers for him or whatever. Like I feel like if he was the lead guard on another team, this guy averaged something like 27 and 6 or something in games Dame didn't play. And I think he's a legit star too. And so it's weird that he's another guard. And now we start with three guards on a new version of this Blazers team. But that guy, if he ever gets moved to another team where he's like, if I'm Toronto right now, I would be doing everything I could to get Anthony, not necessarily Dame. I think he would elevate that team as well.
uh, I raise you, Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah. I
That
mean, Gary's more of an actual shooting guard.
yeah.
Anthony is more of a combo guard, can do
They're
both.
they're not close in
Yeah,
play style. Nah,
yeah,
not remotely. It's very like it's interesting that teams when they're trying to build, I don't know if it just happens this way. It's kind of like how in art or in literature there's like scenes where writers will come from like the same city in the same era and it's because they all collaborate and all that kind of stuff and ideas bubble at the same time. But it seems like good front court teams just have good front courts. Good backcourt teams just have
right.
like a glut of those types of guys. The Raptors, they're like, oh, we have like four really good wings. This is
And you keep
interesting.
drafting them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then like maybe it's tough at the guard position. There's just like no team finds that balance, man. It's really funny. And the Blazers just being like, yeah, we have Scoot, we have Anthony, and we have Shaedon Sharpe. Like there's just it's a gluttonous amount of really interesting uh, combos slash primaries. Let's talk about the primary. Scoot. How much G League stuff did you watch of him beforehand, and then once you realized like, oh, he's gonna be a Blazer, how much did you watch afterwards?
I mean, I watched it as much as I could. Obviously, most people consider him in most years a number one type pick. And so we have Wemby, and outside of Charlotte being stupid, he would have gone number two for any other team. Uh, but yeah, so Scoot, man, the only question is, can he develop a consistent enough jump shot, a 3-point shot? Other than that, he's got everything. He's got the charisma. He's got that it factor. He's got leadership qualities. He's got insane athleticism. He's got long arms and length, even though he's only 6'2". So he's got everything. I mean, just super explosive. Finishing should be great once he gets that down. Um, Mid range, he can pull up on a dime, and so like he's got the whole package outside of maybe that 3-point shot. And we've seen point guards coming in the NBA, whether it's like Jaw or De'Aaron Fox or someone like that, where teams just dare them to shoot and go under picks and stuff like that. So as long as he can figure that out, how to not let defenses sag off of him and pack the paint, I think the sky's the limit for that guy.
I got to cover one Scoot game. He
Oh,
came
nice.
to he came to well, Hamilton, Toronto, Mississauga, whatever you want. He came to Ontario to play some basketball. Um, it was the game he got thrown out of. I didn't think he should have got thrown out, but he did get thrown out of the game. He was slow to start, kind of just like, Jared Butler is like or sorry, John Jenkins, not Jared Butler. John Jenkins is like doing his thing with like the G League Ignite, like a lot of the offense is going through him. Scoot is kind of finding his pacing on the game. In the third quarter, he really turns it on. And like the 905 in that game, and there's like a lot of NBA talent on the floor. Koloko was there for that game as well. And you see the young teenage guard pushing pace, really change the flow of the game, dominate in transition, and then like drag his team back with pick and roll craft that is, peppered in with, lots of paint touches, as you mentioned, like the stop on the dime mid range game, a bunch of, and really, great eyes for playmaking. Like he makes a lot of really high level decisions, gets to dangerous spots. His pick and roll craft, you mentioned how does he defeat the unders? Maybe it's not year one where he fully has a grasp on like the rescreen and the pacing perfectly, especially with how good nail defense is at the NBA nowadays. But I think that's something that his pacing in the pick and roll is elite already. And he did it against professionals. He has the body. I took a
Hmm.
picture of
Yeah.
him, posted it. It went viral because he just looked so absurdly large. People were like, "What?" People thought it was photoshopped. He was
Yeah.
so big. And
Yeah.
so it's just like I expect great things for Scoot. I agree with you that I'm like, how the hell did this guy not go number two? And a number one type pick because you're just not beating Wemby. But like that's
Yeah.
not a bad thing. Who's beating Wemby? They talk
Yeah.
about him like in the same vein as when LeBron came up. Not that I was super old enough to kind of conceptualize what was going on, but like yeah, Scoot rocks, man. You have a lot going on in the backcourt. I do
Yeah.
want to focus on one guy in the Raptors front court who I know you have a vested interest in. Christian Koloko.
Yeah.
You I talk to people around the Raptors. I talk to people from a lot of different places. You were one of the only people who came in and said, "That guy, I like that guy. You got a good
Oh yeah.
one." And he had for a second round pick, especially a big man. I think he had an overwhelmingly successful rookie season. I'm curious how you did keeping tabs on Koloko.
Yeah, it was hard because he didn't play a ton. There was that stretch where he started some games before Jakob got there, and it seemed like maybe they were going to give him a little bit of run there, but he just didn't play a lot, and unfortunately couldn't watch any of his G League games. But now the Blazers have a G League team finally, so we can I can cover that a little bit more. That'll be
Yeah,
fun. But yeah, I don't know. It's really hard, small sample size. He only got you know a limited amount of shots, so like, do you really look too much into field goal percentage and stuff like that? Because you make five more shots and it looks way better,
yeah.
or miss five more shots and it looks way worse when you're only shooting 100 or 200 shots in a whole season. So um yeah, I don't know. Like, I think defensively in the games I saw, he looked fine. You saw the promise there as a rim protector and a help defender, but yeah, still kind of raw offensively, and I'm not sure the new coaching staff if they're going to give him a little bit more opportunity. But just seemed like they, I don't know, like he play well. You probably know, or you obviously know better than I do, but it seemed like he had some good moments and then wouldn't play again for a while. And so as a young guy, that it's kind of hard to know what your role is or what to do when you go in there. Just try not to mess up type attitude. Whereas, a lot of young guys, I think, do better if they're empowered by their coach to go out there and do whatever, not just okay, when you mess up, you're coming out of the game or whatever.
There was a quick hook for a lot of people at the end of the Raptors bench. I do
Yeah.
wonder how that looks with Darko. The Raptors, like Darko, I know he's publicly commented a lot about offense, building offense. Here's an offensive framework. He's had podcasts talking about it for hours. How do you, build the framework for an NBA offense? And then, having like, oh, here's how I do development. Here's an article on the pick and roll, all this kind of stuff. But he is going to have to focus a lot on defense. That is where this team's strength is going to lie, and it's pretty easy. You can think of pretty easy way to build a really good defense with having OG, Scottie, Pascal, and Jakob. Those four just playing like a ton
Mhm.
of minutes. Koloko, I think, will benefit from being able to just step in and be like, I can most easily emulate what Jakob is doing. Even if I'm not Jakob, I can most easily emulate his place in the defense. And maybe the Raptors will have like a more nebulous defense that changes a lot depending on lineups. I wonder, but I do really think Koloko has a chance to like step into a center role. And I had that piece I did in the early part of last season where I
Mhm.
watched all of Koloko's pick and roll stuff, all the different coverages, and then I went to him and watched some film with him and kind of asked around what people thought. He wins minutes. He gets a lot of blocks and fouls a lot. You could find the same thing. Not that he'll be Rudy Gobert or Jaren Jackson Jr., but those are two hallmarks of the early parts of their careers as well. Lots of blocks, lots of fouls. Guys have to figure out, how long it takes to cover that 8 feet across the paint. Transition themselves around the floor without fouling. It takes a while to get there as the low man all the time. I do think there's a lot of potential for him to have a very strong defensive season. The offense, he needs weight, like pounds.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like he has the arms to finish, but it's just that core and just guys are pushing him around. He's a young big in a league that is playing really strong fours or like overwhelmingly large fives. And it's
Yeah.
very tough for a slim guy to just come in and occupy those really like the trenches of the floor. And
Mhm.
so the offense I don't expect to be good this season. Again, his hands need work, needs to put on weight, can't lose as much ground, but uh, there's some jump shot stuff there, maybe. And he doesn't need to be impressive offensively
Yeah.
yet. And even if he were, this team is going to have trouble carving out, you know, space for him to get
Mhm.
good shots anyway. So,
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with emulating Jakob because, like, he had some of those same problems when he came into the league. So he was super skinny, and um, you could see that he knew how to play, but just couldn't figure out exactly how to put it all together.
mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a really good person if he's um, being mentored by him to because like Jakob became a really good passer, and I still think Koloko has that upside to be kind of a hub on offense, not like a primary hub, but a secondary one. And I think he sees the floor well. It's just the game just moved too fast for him last year, and like you said, when you're getting pushed around and you can't stay in a spot compared to when you were in college and those things were easy. Um, I think once he learns that kind of stuff and figures out the body, I think he'll still be a competent player.
Yeah, and that's not even something because he hasn't even been able to be a hub really at the G League level.
Mhm.
And I don't think like you saying that there's potential for it, I don't think he has to prove it yet even. Most
Nah,
bigs who aren't all-stars or all NBA like hubs, a lot of them develop that passing touch, that passing flair like 26 and up, maybe even like
yeah,
28 and up. A lot of bigs, it's maybe they get bounced around, they play on a bad team and they get like a 2 month stretch where somebody says, split cuts
yeah,
off of him. Let's see how
yeah,
that goes. And then they're like, oh, this is cool. I can do this. Um, I think a lot of bigs develop it later. And Koloko, despite not seeing much now, it's not like they embolden him. It's not like they put the ball in his hands very often anyway. They're like, go stand and see if you can get offensive rebound. Maybe that'll be good. Um, in addition to that, he's also very like elite feet on the perimeter.
mhm,
Very good at flipping his hips too. He was shockingly good when I went over the film as far as like sticking with guys on the perimeter and knowing when to like open the gate and pursue as a runner instead of trying to slide and
yeah,
also sliding when the opportunity is there to keep a guy, in between your shoulders. It's like this is really impressive because that's not intuitive for everybody. A lot of guys just his fouls were contesting shots, not
mm,
getting, kind of in a gridlock on the perimeter,
yeah.
which is those are all big deals, good things.
And if he figures that out, to where he can become a switchable big, in the vein of like a Bam Adebayo or a Nicholas Claxton showed that last year,
Yeah.
took a huge jump that way and became an elite switchable defender on the perimeter. that's game changing for a defense. So I don't know if he'll ever get to that level as those two, but just showing signs in his rookie year of being able to do that is a positive sign, and that's one trait I think a lot of scouts and GMs are going to be looking for in bigs is that just that little ability to know when to do those things, like you said, and then to show that at an NBA level, which he started to do last year, and so that'll be great to watch moving forward.
Yeah, it's like if you have a big who you don't switch, the 5 out with 18 seconds of the clock. If you can do it with 7, just like a
Yeah,
guy steps out, big old hawk with the wingspan coming towards you.
yeah,
If it's Koloko, it's like 7-1 and whatever that his arms extend, across the Bering Strait or whatever. Like, it's like damn. You can overwhelm a guy to like 5 seconds with, escape dribbles. It's kind of like what Chris Bosh really was fantastic at doing with the Heat was like, that hard hedge and guys are like out to the sideline, like what the hell,
yeah.
Um, guards have initiators have better responses to that nowadays, but I guess we'll see what happens with that. Are there any other players of interest on the Raptors for you?
Well, I'm always interested in young players, so it will be interesting to see how Grady Dick fits in with. Now you have the shooter, you have the defenders at the wings. Now you have a shooting wing that I mean I think maybe some of his defensive issues are overblown, but um, I I am gonna be fascinated to watch how he mixes with those because if he can be that floor spacer, you can't play all of them at the same time. But it would be something to see that team with a wing that can actually shoot the ball at a decent clip, or not even necessarily shoot the ball, but just have the gravity to not let defenses do what they have done against the Raptors in previous years, where it's just like, okay, well, we'll just like the Blazers. There was a game last year where Yusuf Nurkic literally would just turn around and let Scottie Barnes shoot. Like he wasn't even turned towards him. Like he would just be like, and turn around. He did that to several other players like Jared Vanderbilt and stuff throughout the season. But like, like you won't be able to do that with if Grady Dick's out there because you have to watch where he's at all times. So adding a player like that to the mix, I'm interested to see how that fits in with the defensive minded players of your team right now.
Well, that's the interesting aspect too. Is like OG shoots well enough for
Hmm.
OG. Like he's a fantastic catch and shoot player. The pull up stuff is never really stabilized anywhere. It's stabilized at a bad place. I would say it's had spikes of like, oh, interesting. But as far as how he's made himself into a dangerous shooter, excellent. Is he a movement shooter? No, but that's a really tough development.
Right.
Scottie Barnes, if he was on a bunch of different places in the league, his shooting development wouldn't be like, okay, if this doesn't come along, we're in a really, really tough spacing position.
Yeah.
There might not be as much pressure on it. Pascal Siakam, among fours, especially guys who initiate and play make as well as he does, is his shooting bad? No. But here's the thing, not having like motion shooting and not having elite shooting anywhere, and just like having guys who, since a couple of them are playing the 2, where typically you get pretty good shooting, a lot of movement shooting, a couple guys playing the 3, where at the very least you typically get, decent catch and shoot shooting. If it's OG, Pascal, Scottie, and then Jakob in the front, like at the 5, who he won't shoot a lick, it's like, damn, we're not really getting it anywhere. So these guys on a personal level saying, why doesn't this guy shoot? It doesn't work. Like they're doing a good job. They're moving along, developing at their own rate. It's just the composite average of all
Right.
those guys is
Hmm.
tough. And pushing in Grady, who's like this really great reactive cutter, and he forms up to drives and like broken plays to find shooting space all the time and will have gravity. It's like this is important.
Yeah.
And if the he has slow feet. He's got big calves. He's a little bit slow footed on the perimeter. He's going to get in trouble defensively, just as like a matter of fact. But the reads off ball are good, and he's not like a 6'5", 6'6", movement shooter. He's a 6'9" movement shooter, which helps insulate against some of the things that might be bad defensively. A little bit extra wingspan, the standing reach. it makes you a lot more dangerous in passing lanes. It can also help dissuade some of those skip passes, or it makes you better as a tagger. There's just positives to being big defensively. Yes, Samson, you've
Yeah.
discovered something here, certainly.
Yes, and then other than him, it's more just I can't wait to see what Ujiri does with all these
Yeah.
contracts. Like, does he end up moving OG finally this year? And if he does, did he wait too long to do it? And or does everyone seem content and they sign extensions, or they go into the off season with that problem and hope they resign everyone? So that's it. Does that depend on how they do this year? Is that is that going to be the other pressure of the season? Is if they don't get off to a good start, is this going to affect
Yeah.
how it looks long term? So yeah, it's there's a lot of factors there, not necessarily individual players, but yeah, just overall direction. Uh, Choosing not to fully rebuild this summer, will that ultimately be the best decision? Or can you still piece this together and turn this back around into a competing team?
Team building is tough, man.
Oh, it is,
You
yeah,
just
for sure.
you can't control for stuff, and
Hmm.
then like you could sign a guy with the best track record, and it's
Hmm.
like, this guy for sure, and they can just go sideways, and it's
Yeah,
like, well, damn, how do you control? You can't control for the uncontrollable, and then also differing opinions or different team building philosophies can lean you towards some things that end up being positives over time and some things that end up being negatives over time. And both the positives and the negatives can exist in the same philosophy. So it's
yeah,
like, how do you start cutting out the bad stuff while still keeping the good stuff? It's just like, I don't know, man. Talking to people last season, a lot of people were like, I love what the Raptors are doing. It's interesting. They're like the
hmm,
team nobody wants to play. And
yeah,
then it became last season where, the pro scouts for other teams and coaches for other teams said, we don't even really have to game plan to play against this team because we just collapse the defense and then shoot open threes. And it's like, well, damn, man, that's you could have been a little bit nicer about it,
you're
but
right.
okay. Um, I hope they turn it around. Last season didn't end the way they wanted to. They've had significant changes, like Nick Nurse and Fred VanVleet leaving. I know neither was liked by the time they left, but it's significant. Like
Right,
that's the championship coach, and Fred, while he wasn't like the stalwart starting guard during the championship season, by the end of it, he was starting and guarding
yeah,
Steph Curry and getting a
hmm,
Finals MVP vote. And the defense did fall quite a ways from where it was, but like that's a lot of possessions that now have to go elsewhere, and hopefully it,
yeah,
it goes well. But it's just like the unknown. We're operating in the
yeah.
unknown, both of
So
us.
what did you think of the Schroder edition?
I think I liked it.
Hmm.
Now I was recording with Trey. We were reacting to like we're doing a stream like you guys do, and we're like, hey, Fred left, and then all of a sudden it's like Dennis Schroeder's a Raptor. I'm like, what are they doing here? I'm
Yeah,
having a tough time conceiving of it, just because he's um among other things not a super great shooter. And so
yeah.
I'm like, where
You're
are
adding
they
another one of those.
I was like, where are they getting their spacing from? And then I kind of convinced myself that he'll probably be sixth man and he's going to help elevate bench units, transitional
Mhm.
lineups. And
Yeah,
also just like he's going to get more paint touches than Fred did per possession, like per used pick and roll possession. He'll turn more corners. He'll probably be better on broken plays and when bigs switch out, like Fred with his injury troubles, that athleticism got sapped. He wasn't able to like beat bigs on the perimeter very often. There's positive changes. Now, Fred is the better player. Like you would have a hell of a time trying to convince me that Schroeder's better than Fred, but there are some positives to it. Schroeder's a better point of attack defender. He's also less attentive off ball. Like there's yin and yang and all that kind of stuff. But I think Schroeder for what the Raptors are trying to do, which apparently none of us know, it's like, who knows? But
Yeah,
if what they wanted to do was sign a good guard on a decent contract, Schroder for the mid-level exception, 2 years, 26 million, hell yeah. Uh, the mid-level exception isn't going to change your team, or if
right.
it does, you've done the best business of all time. Like
Yeah,
that's where I'm at. Is it wouldn't be radical. It's not even supposed to be. Um, but I think it will err on the side of good. That's where I am. What do you
yeah.
think? What do you think of Shooter?
Well, yeah, I thought it was weird because I mean, we've talked now since I met you last summer about the shooting, and we mentioned it then, and so yeah, like it's not the greatest fit when you see that signing. You see him go out and win a World
Hell
Cup
yeah,
championship. I'm sure that
MVP.
that got you excited. But but yeah, but then if you just think about it, taking a step back, there wasn't when once Fred left, there wasn't a lot of good options to be that person who could shoot or whatever. You're not going to really find that at the mid level. So short of making a trade for that type of player, like I think it's fine. It'll be fine if Barnes. So you think Barnes will start a point guard then?
I think they
Uh,
should try it, man.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
like what you said, there's a lot of wisdom in how you not only you want to hit the diminishing returns. Like
hmm,
like give these guys possessions and like see what happens. If it
yeah,
doesn't work out for Scottie, at least you know.
yeah,
And while I would probably lean more so towards he's gonna have a lot of trouble being like a perimeter initiator,
yeah,
like live dribble initiator, I think he'll have trouble doing it. Figure it out, especially
hmm,
since and what you said is the part that a lot of times goes unsaid is like people talk about development in that. Well, let's see if the guy can do it, but you included. Let's see what he can do.
hmm,
Figure it out early, and this can inform what we build around.
yeah,
This can really help us make decisions in the future because the talent level, especially for players like eighth, ninth men, has gotten so good in the NBA that fit has started really to become more important. Well, maybe not
yep,
more important, but it has elevated a lot relative to just like when it was just like 3 stars just completely mow down everybody. It doesn't really work like that anymore because the seventh guy can go off for like 32 points in a game six.
yep,
For like 6 teams across the NBA, their seventh man can do something like that. I mean, Bruce Brown was pulling up for three in the finals. It's like the talent level has gotten so good that you have to find these symbiotic players. So, like, hell yeah, let Scotty figure it out. Why
yeah.
not?
Bruce Brown, there's a mid-level exception that elevated the team to go against what you just said.
That's true, and I'll be
um,
talking about him with
yeah,
Caitlin Cooper tomorrow. So hopefully you get the good Bruce Brown stuff.
yeah. Well, with like when Ben Simmons was at his peak, they started to put just shooting around him. So it'll I don't know if it can work with
Yeah,
like we talked
I
about
don't like
the
that
lack of
idea.
shooting, but yeah, like ultimately, I think Barnes needs to be in a lineup where he does have shooting around him if
Yeah,
he's going to work as the point guard. But yeah, this year, like just try it out, and if it, like you said, if it doesn't work, then maybe you have to move on from one of OG and Pascal and get a different type of forward there, or maybe you ultimately do move Barnes and get a big time player and it's a shorter window, but you have that 3-man lineup with OG, Pascal, and whoever that star is. Um, and you just go from there and worry about the future later. But yeah,
hmm
I would find that out now versus later.
I'm of the mind that whether or not Scotty is at the three, the four, or the one, this team has to play smash mouth basketball,
Hmm.
and just you might as well put it in Scotty's hands for a decent chunk of it so you figure stuff out because he is really like a tremendously talented playmaker on broken plays as the floor changes and warps depending on what lineups are out there. He's going to figure out passes that nobody else on the roster is going to figure out. So you might learn stuff from is designing offense around him level too. And then just to get back to the shooter part, the Raptors have more shooting at the back end of their like they lost Fred, which
Yeah,
was he had a bad shooting year, but he's
yeah,
an elite shooter, elite spacing,
yeah,
both as a screener and pulling guys out. the gravity is there. But as far as like down the back end of the roster, they should be able to put out more lineups this season with better shooting. And I think Schroder mixing into those is a decent place to be. So yeah, feel okay about Schroder, but still put that ball in Scottie's hands. Let's go. Let's see what it is. You might as well
Yeah.
sort it out. Um, might be ugly to watch. I might upset people, by doing like I hand tracked everything that happened and it was terrible types of articles. But
Yeah.
at least we'll know. I guess
Yep.
that's where I am. Any parting shots about the Blazers or the Raptors before we get out of here?
Um, Not really. Just good luck to the Raptors this season. Hope it goes well for you guys. And yeah, just sitting here waiting. There was some buzz a couple days ago about Dame trade being close, and so everyone was all excited for this to finally end. So I'm just going to be sitting here waiting for something to happen. And in the meantime, uh, hopefully at some point in the next few weeks, I can start getting excited about the young players and what we got back in the Dame trade.
I need 2 days. I need to release this episode tomorrow,
Yeah,
and then I talked to Nikias Duncan for the Heat. We
right,
also need the Heat conversation to not have
right.
Dame traded yet. So I need 2 days if the Dame and Co can, or I guess it's not up to him, but if the Blazers can pay attention to a little podcast host over here, we just give me 2 days.
So
Eric,
have you talked to him yet or not?
who?
Uh,
Oh yeah, Nikias. I recorded it a
oh,
couple
okay.
days
So you
ago.
already I was gonna say you could you could just wait until the
Yeah.
trade happens, but no.
No, we recorded it and we only
Yeah.
talked about it from the point of view of it was recorded before the Raptors all of a sudden were like, "Hey, we're in it." So I'm just
Oh,
like,
okay.
"Oh yeah, he's going to Miami eventually, right?"
Right.
And so I guess we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2 days
All right.
Blazers, please and thanks. Eric, do you want to do a plug before we get out of here?
Sure. Just check me out on Blazers Uprise and Blazers Uprise Live on YouTube, and I'm on Twitter at Hoopsjock.
Hell yeah. Eric, thank you so much for the time, man. For the second
Thank
year in a row,
you.
very generous. And if anybody wants to pay attention to one of the most exciting young backcourts in the NBA, stick along with Eric. Listen to his coverage over the course of the season. We'll see how that goes. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And yeah, whether you got into this in the morning or at night, have a blessed day and goodbye.